Today on the podcast, we are thrilled to welcome Ace Atkins. He is the best-selling author of 30 novels, including the Quinn Colson series, the Nick Travers series, several books, and Robert B. Parker's Spenser series, Don't Let the Devil Ride, and the upcoming Everybody Wants to Rule the World. He is also a first guest to have appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He's a huge admirer of Elmore's, and he shares some great stories with us today about getting feedback from and traveling with Elmore, working as a Tampa Bay crime reporter, and so much more. Shout out to Dr. Megan Abbott for putting us in touch with him. Please enjoy Ace Atkins. Thank you again for sharing Don't Let the Devil Ride with me. It is a great book, and it's so much fun, and I have some questions about it for sure. And also thanks to Megan Abbott for putting us in touch. You're gonna be hanging out with her.
That's right. I'll see her tonight. I'm looking forward to that. One of my favorite people and favorite writers.
And this is for her book El Dorado Drive?
This is for El Dorado Drive. She'll be here in Oxford, Mississippi tonight, talking at Square Books.
That sounds great. We will not post this until after the event, but
yes,
if you have a time machine and you missed your opportunity, check it out. And you're in Mississippi.
That's right.
How did you end up in Mississippi after spending so much time in Florida and Alabama? Like, how did Mississippi happen for you?
You know, I was coming through here, and this is not too far from where I'm from. I went to Auburn University, but I was cutting through around 2001. I was still working as a newspaper reporter for the Tampa Tribune, and I was just kind of taking a sabbatical, trying to figure out what I was going to do. I'd already published 2 books. I was working on a 3rd book, and a friend of mine here invited me to come in if I decided to take a break from being a reporter, like I was thinking about doing. I could come here and teach. And so I taught journalism for about 5 years here, advanced reporting and feature writing. And so I never intended on necessarily settling here, but I've been here for 25 years.
And you're in Oxford at the University of Mississippi?
I am. That's right.
Okay.
Oxford, Mississippi, where the university is.
Is that how you know Megan? Because she was a scholar there?
I've known Megan probably for at least 20 plus years, but we met at a book conference, and so we were very good friends before she came here. I would like to think she came here because she had some other friends here, like Jack Pendarvis, a terrific TV writer, is here, and so I think we really encouraged her to take the Grisham Fellowship.
Seems like it worked out. So,
yes, we had a great time. We miss her very much. We're going to try to kidnap her and keep her here, something like out of one of Dutch's books.
Well, kidnappings don't always go smoothly in his books. We are here on the Elmore Leonard podcast with the amazing Ace Atkins. Ace, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
There's a lot to talk about. Since this is Elmore's podcast, I like to start the conversation off with the same question for all of our guests, which is, what was the one that really sucked you in and made you say to yourself, I got to read more of this guy?
You know, I think one of the first things I read was Get Shorty. And I think that's when he really was hitting the national stage. Of course, he had a lot of success with movies before that and books, but that was the one that was just a huge all over the place. And I think I got drawn into that world and then just kept on reading and then going back and becoming obsessed. But it was my sister who gave a copy of it and said, "This is your kind of thing. This is."
Nice.
I don't know if it was a compliment. She said it's as weird as you are, and so I thought that was great. And I loved the characters. I loved the world. I loved the dialogue. And it was just, what can you say? I mean, when you read one of Elmore Leonard's books, it's just fun. It's a joy to read.
They are, and that is definitely one of the best. We haven't covered that one. We do deep dives on the podcast. We haven't done that one yet, but we certainly will. We're trying to get Dustin Hoffman to show up and atone for not ever making La Brava that inspired
supposed to be La Brava, which he would have been terrific. I mean, he would have been a great La Brava, which is, I think you're asking about the book that really solidified it for me, where I was just a rabid fan, was probably La Brava. I think if you that's the quintessential Elmore Leonard novel. It's just terrific.
It's fantastic. That is one that we talked to Megan about it a little bit, and actually, Joanna in Don't Let the Devil Ride does remind me a little bit of Gene Shaw
Of
from La
course,
Brava,
yes,
and so it
yeah.
was really fun
I can't
to
escape. I mean, the influence of his work is huge,
yeah.
and reading that from a fairly young age and studying it. I mean, I didn't just read it and become a fan, but when I started working to become a writer, you read the best, you study the best, and to me, he's the gold standard.
Is there something about his writing in particular that obviously dialogue is top of mind for a lot of folks, but is there something about the way that he works or the way that he wrote that as you had got more experience as a novelist yourself, you came to appreciate more?
I think it's the Elmore Leonard rule of, if it looks like writing, take it out. And I think that is the biggest thing. And I don't necessarily do that, even though I had read, most of his books by that time when I started publishing. But I still was really meddling with trying to be, as Elmore would say, very showy. And really trying to consciously write and impress people with the ways I would phrase things. And as I got to know him personally, he came here to Mississippi twice, once to Jackson, one here as a guest speaker in Oxford. I got to watch the Tigers World Series with him
Oh,
afterwards,
nice.
and hang out with the guy who brought him here was the great short story writer, my friend Barry Hanna.
Mm,
But I think that was really the most cardinal sin, that really bothered him, is people that would overwrite and try to be showy.
yeah.
And he knew that being a good writer was about the details and about the dialogue, and not the way that the author tried to show off and to draw attention to themselves, how great they were. I don't think I really learned that until maybe my fourth book. And it took him, honestly, telling me personally, he had very graciously blurbed my fourth novel,
Oh, wow.
and I was traveling with him in France, of all places. And I asked him, what did you really think? And of course, he was a guy that was very direct. Uh, he was very laconic in real life, as his characters were. And he said, I think that you could probably not consciously write so much. I think you could probably dial that down a little bit. And I really, and a few other things that he told me, but that was the main message I got from him, which is, let
Oh,
the
wow.
story, let the characters, let them do the work. Don't get yourself out of the way, and let it be seamless. Let the story take over. And so that's the huge thing that I learned from him.
Just take me through that. So you meet him, you have a mutual friend who brings him down to Mississippi, and then you go to France with him. Like, what happened between then? Like,
Well, it just was a series of great luck, great fortune. My friend Barry Hanna had great admiration for Elmore. He loved his work. He thought he was just fantastic. And
yeah.
towards the end of Barry's life, he got more and more into crime fiction. I think Barry and I had a conversation about this, maybe even a year or two before that, talking about who were the best writers. And of course, I named, Elmore Leonard was top of my list. And so he came here, and I was able to hang out with him, get to know him in a social kind of way. Had dinner with him. First, of course, the first thing he wanted to do is, where's the Tigers game on? I forgot what game it was in the series, and of course, we found the only restaurant in town that had the Tigers game on, and so there was a huge amount of conversation. But eventually that, and then when Tishomingo Blues came out, he was in Jackson, Mississippi, and actually gave a terrific talk down there. Had a packed house where he gave kind of a craft talk, which I don't really know he was really often to do, but it was a lot about, he had such admiration for John Steinbeck, and he talked a lot about John Steinbeck and the influence of Steinbeck on his work, and it was just really wonderful and very inspirational. And then I don't remember, it was a year or two, 3 years later, he and his wife at that time, Christine, happened to be, Elmore Leonard was the headliner at a book festival in southern France that I was invited to. And I was lucky enough to, be on the train with him and travel with him. And he was, he was a rock star in France, and
Yeah.
it was like an old movie. We would get off. I remember getting off the train in, I guess we were in Montpellier, and we get off the train in southern France, and there's 8, 10 photographers taking his picture, and he doesn't say anything, and he just gets up and he lights a cigarette, blows the smoke out. And the next day, I look on the cover of Le Monde, and I'm showing him we're at breakfast. All the writers, we're all sitting at breakfast. I said, and he said, "Yeah, I knew that was going to be the shot." He said, "As soon as I take out the cigarette," he was such an ad man. He'd always had the ad man mentality. He said, "I knew that was going to be the shot," and it was a picture of him blowing the smoke. He said, "That's what they wanted." And he said, "I gave them what they wanted." He was such a pro.
So you guys got to be friends, it sounds like, in France, or even before that.
He did, and one of the things with him is he did not like to email. I don't know if he ever got into email, but I wrote him letters, and I have a handful of really wonderful letters that he typed out himself. And
Oh, wow.
so, it was, and these are just wonderful. And we could always have a conversation about Westerns. He never lost his love of talking about Westerns. So we would talk about the Westerns that inspired him. And I think one of the last letters I got from him, I don't know what happened to it, but he was talking about writing another Western, that he wanted to go back to write another Western. Yeah, always very generous with his time, very generous with giving advice. Just a really kind guy, very thoughtful man.
Yeah.
He was always curious about the world. He was not locked into a certain time period. He wasn't writing about the era that he knew or only things that he knew about. I mean, the old adage did not apply to Elmore Leonard, which is write what you know. We would have a very limited shelf from him if that was true. It was,
Right.
what do you find out about? He was always researching, always wanting to know something. And that's, we talk a little bit later about the Florida books. And that's, what he did is he learned about that area. And if he didn't know certain details, later in his career, he had Greg Sutter to go out and to ask questions and to do research for him. So I admired that a great deal. And it's something I've tried to take it into my own career, is to continually learn. If it's something I don't know anything about, to research it, to find out about it. But
Yeah.
he was great. He was a wonderful observer. He was always watching things, even in the trip to France. And I actually have to credit my wife I think she snagged us a seat next to Elmore and to Christine, and so we were able to sit with them. And there were many writers there that were trying to jockey for position. There was
Sure.
one really arrogant writer from New York who definitely wanted to do some movie business with Elmore Leonard and try to cut him in through. And it's funny. I think he liked me, and I'd like to say that he liked me because he read my book and he was like, "Oh, kid, you've got some promise, and I'm going to work with you." But I think it goes back to the Michigan connection. He was so loyal to Detroit. I think where we really hit it off is I had lived in Bloomfield Hills as a kid.
Oh, wow.
And so we knew the same places. And I lived in Bloomfield Hills. And one of the things that just really hit home with me about several of his novels is I know exactly what he's talking about. I know in, the books with Stick, the A&P, one of the A&Ps that he robs is where we used to go shopping, and so many places. And my dad worked. The thing that he thought was really interesting is my father had been a coach for the Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
And so he just thought that was great. He was such a sports guy, such a sports fan. And so we talked about sports and football and Bloomfield Hills and restaurants. And we talked about the Macus Red Fox. And so I was able to talk Detroit with him. And I think he was kind of surprised by that. But yeah.
That's
Wonderful.
awesome.
But the curiosity with him, the always wanting to learn. He didn't just stay in Detroit. He didn't just stay in what he did. He would find out about it. He loved to learn. He loved to. There was nothing. He was a great reporter in that way.
Two things. One, who was that arrogant New York writer?
I can't tell you.
I'll cut it out, I promise.
I'll tell you. I'll message it to you.
Tell me later. Oh,
Yes.
man.
He definitely wanted to do some business, and I think that Elmore could catch wind of it very quickly. He
I
knew that
bet.
this guy was going to be trying to hit him up for an agent or something.
Elmore did a little bit of, probably best known for Impressions of Murder profile that he
Yeah.
did that kind of led to City Primeval and some such great work. But you were a reporter for a while. And how do you go from did you study journalism in college, or how did that come about? How do you go from being a national champion football player to investigative reporter in Tampa Bay.
Well, and I was less of I did do some investigative pieces, but I was kind of more of just a crime beat reporter. I was really, living in that world that again is such the wonderful thing about Elmore Leonard's books. There's a little part in, I was just revisiting some of the Florida books and split images, where the detective is into the killer's library and he's looking at all the different books and talking about how similar they are. They're all about killing the prime minister. They're all about killing Hitler. They're all killing this and whatever. And then he starts riffing on it's the bad detective that becomes the bodyguard, and he says, and then you always got the guy who was a special forces guy, and he's can't beat everybody, and he's such a tough guy, and whatever. And Elmore wrote about real people, and he wrote real people that I met on the cop beat, and I don't think that it definitely was something that a world I wanted to know about. It was a world that I wanted to be a part of and something I had not experienced in my daily life. I was drawn to Florida because I knew somebody that was down there. I also had a good friend that said they were looking for reporters. This was in the early 90s. I had not been in journalism school. I had not had that thing, but I had curiosity and I had a drive and I wanted to be around it. And Florida stuff with everything that Dutch did with Get Shorty, the beginning parts of it, and Maximum Bob, and Out of Sight. I guess that was before Out of Sight, but all of that stuff, and then also the stuff that was happening with Carl Hyacin. There was a lot of activity that was happening with Florida fiction,
Yeah.
and I just thought it was fascinating. And so I ended up getting a job down there. Ended up finally, as a part-time reporter, then I became a full-time newspaper reporter. And where I wanted to be was the beat that a lot of people did not want. They wanted to cover sports. They kept up trying to put me on the sports page because of my background.
Sure.
And that was the last thing that I wanted to do. And I let it be known very early I wanted to cover the crime beat. So those guys, those blue-collar homicide detectives, the bail bondsmen, the crummy jail, the judges with questionable morals. I lived in that. That was my home in Central Florida, and it felt like I was living in an Elmore Leonard novel, and I absolutely loved it.
Was it reading that great fiction, whether it's Elmore Leonard or George V. Higgins or Carl Hyacin, who are hoping to get on the podcast one day? We'll keep asking. It sounds like that's what made you want to be a reporter, but you did have, you mentioned your dad. Your dad played in the NFL. He coached in the NFL. You played college football at the highest level. I don't know this, so forgive my ignorance, but I don't know if you wanted to play professional or if that didn't work out, but that's a big change. And it's really interesting that you could have probably in the South, you played for one of the kind of legendary schools. You had an unbeaten season. You were on the cover of Sports Illustrated. You probably could have been a sports reporter very easily if you wanted to.
And it never crossed my mind. It's interesting you say that. And it was, of course, the first thing that anywhere that I went, I worked for a little bit as a part-timer at the St. Petersburg Times, which is a terrific newspaper. And then when I went over to the Tribune when I got a full-time job, they kept on trying to put me on the sports beat and cover it. I was sick of it. I was sick of it. I wanted to live in the world of these people that I had read about. I wanted I wanted to go to crime scenes. I wanted to interview people in prison. I wanted to cover kidnappings, and there's so many. I was already steeped in crime fiction, and I think that especially Florida crime fiction, which I really think that school of what we think of now as Florida crime fiction, which is crazy fiction. It's the Florida man fiction. Really was invented. I think it was invented by Elmore Leonard. It's you think about what Hyacin does, and I think he would agree with me. Is he kind of took an Elmore Leonard book and then dialed it up to 11. He really he kind of just made it just absolutely insane.
Yeah.
But I don't think Elmore Leonard was the first to really explore the weirdness, the craziness. Of course, there had been, Charles Willeford, the great John D. MacDonald, and there had been crime fiction before, but really celebrating this place is strange. This is a crazy place. That started with Dutch.
I want to dig into this a little bit more. I do want to, I do have one question that I just want to ask in terms of playing football. I think that there's something really, I mean, football seems like, from an outsider standpoint, from a fan standpoint, it's one of the most collaborative team sports that there is. And there's something about being in a locker room that, and I'm curious, aside from the chops that you got writing for a newspaper, but did you, like, if at all, did
Yeah.
playing college football, did being in the locker rooms, did being around so many different kinds of people, there's, I don't know, 50, 100 kids on a team, you're meeting people from all over
Sure.
the country,
Yeah.
maybe not all over the world, but you're
Right.
meeting so many different kinds of people that must have helped your ear,
Absolutely. I
helped
mean,
you
it's
study
funny.
people.
Yeah, no, no, that's a really good question. One people don't really ask me about with football, which is that was the greatest part of football was not what did you get out of football, whatever, and but what I got out of it was I mean it was everybody. I mean, the team is made up of all kinds of people. I mean, I had kids that had been in juvenile prison. I
Yeah.
had kids that were, from these very small schools in Alabama, and then we had people from Florida, and we had people, transfers
From
coming from
Bloomfield Hills, Michigan.
Bluefield Hills. You got somebody coming in from. We had a kicker. One of my good friends. He was from Arizona, and so you just had all kinds. Just everybody, all kinds of things. And there were no stereotypes that worked for an athlete. And I love that. I mean, and we back then we all lived in the same building. That was before a lot of the rules changed. That we all ate at the same dining hall. We all lived together, and so it was a terrific experience. And so you got to really, develop an ear for language and the way people talk and jokes. And I mean, it was great. Yeah, it really was. And I really that experience was very much when I made that very awkward transition from. I knew I wanted to be a novelist, but how do you become a novelist without experience? How do you learn things? How do you get things? And I then after college, I realized I wanted to be more than anything else a crime reporter. But the newsroom is like being part of a team too. I miss that every day. I don't necessarily miss, as we're in August right now, I don't miss playing football. I don't miss going out and practice. I hated that. But I miss being part of that team, like in a newsroom and with breaking news and coming in and getting your coffee. And, every day I was at the police department. Every day I went up the escalator at Tampa Police Department headquarters and what happened last night and what was the shooting and what we're going to go in and all these crazy stories. And, I covered a case one time where with the sheriff's office where there was a missing carnival worker, and it was just crazy. It was like it is like I was living it. I lived that, and it was so much fun because I love those stories that Elmore Leonard had written, and now I was able to live it. And Florida was just he's not exaggerating. He captures the damn feel of it spot on. I mean, it's not a police procedural in the fact of we're going to get some forensics here and we're going to figure this out and this is the way the master detective works. It's the way it really is. It's guys
Yeah.
who are sitting around, men and women in law enforcement shooting the shit. I mean, I knew people. I know a woman here that was a former marshal. She's like Karen Cisco, and the way they talk to each other, and that's exactly the way things are. I don't know if anyone really captured that aesthetic of that more than anybody. But yeah, so yeah, what I learned going back to sorry to get back to
No.
the newsroom, but for me, being a football player and being a part of that was a wonderful experience, and being thrown with all kinds of people from all over the place and hearing all kinds of stories and then being part of a team. And then I think that's what made the transition very familiar to me, being in the newsroom.
Yeah.
Is because you couldn't be sensitive. You couldn't have, you couldn't have, when somebody come in and chew me out for the way a story was written and rewrite it from top to bottom. I mean, that's nothing compared to a guy, with a whistle and yelling in your face and screaming. I mean, it was just like, okay, tear my story up, let's go. And I was very open to criticism. I was very open to learning. I was very open to repetition and getting. So it helped. Yes, yeah, it was a big help.
We mentioned Sunset Park. We mentioned White Shadow. How did you? And that was. It starts with the death, murder of someone named Edie Parkhill. How did that? Which was a cold case.
Yeah.
And so, how did you? I mean, you're a young reporter. How did you discover it? How did you come about it? What made you ultimately? You ended up getting nominated for a Pulitzer based on these articles. But what was it about that story that grabbed you, and how did you start writing about it?
I was in the newsroom and I had already published two books. And it was funny. I was writing these books. Started writing a crime novel series. That was, really, you talk about where do I get these ideas about an ex-football player, who gets involved in criminal cases, and so it was very kind of somewhat autobiographical in my fantasy world. Uh, and there was a reporter there, a guy named Orville Jackson, who had been a veteran reporter. He covered the Kennedy White House. He covered the space program. He worked for the UPI. And I love talking to the older reporters. The older reporters for me were endless sources of information. Another guy that I worked with was a guy named Leland Hawes, and he had started off as a copy boy during World War II. So that gives you the kind of the institutional knowledge of the town and everything these guys had. But anyway, Orville came in. Orville was funny. He was kind of a funny, crotchety guy, and he was like, "I read your book. I liked it. But if you want to really, you want to read something really interesting here." And he had saved this damn story for, I don't know if he had it or he got it from the back files or whatever, but it was original front page from 1956 about the inquiry into the Edie Park-Hill death, suspicious death. And it looked like a game of Clue. It was like the maid, the husband, the private eye. I mean, it just looked like a old Signet paperback book. It was amazing. And the coverage they had back then is something that, we can't replicate these days. It was 12 pages of courtroom coverage and that's again how I learned a lot about writing dialogue, was just reading how people talk in court. And I know that Dutch did the same thing, and I know that of course George Higgins did the same thing. And you just look at the way people are talking, and you look at the way the interviews. I was fascinated by it, but then it came to a point like, what the hell do you do with this? Can I write a novel about it? Can I? And so what I ended up doing, and I fortunately and unfortunately, when I got in the newspaper business, it was at the twilight of that world. I was very fortunate to get in there to work with people like Orville Jackson and Leland Hawes and these people that had been at the newspaper forever, and these great editors. And I mean, it was the same. I mean, when I worked in the 90s, it was a hell of a lot different from working there in the 50s. I mean, we had the printing presses going, we had the trucks rolling, we had also, but it was, I was very fortunate to be there, but unfortunately it was also the very end of the newspaper business. So I didn't stick around. I wish I'd had another 5-10 years in that business when it was, when the internet came in. But,
Yeah.
so what I did was I decided I was very inspired. I was really into music. I'm still very much into music by the writer Peter Gralnick. And the way that Peter could take fact and turn it into something that is so readable and so much like a novel. What he did with Elvis Presley. I mean, you read those books, and it's just the journalism and the research is unparalleled. It's amazing. But you read them, and it's like reading a page-turning book. It's amazing. So that's what I tried to do. Is I started off kind of an investigation into what happened, who's still around, and I found out there was some of the people in the newsroom remembered it. Like I mentioned, Leland Hawes. There were also detectives who were retired. There were other reporters who'd been around. There was even the doctor who was part of the case.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I just started collecting all this stuff, and I decided to write it really in a very Peter Gralnick kind of way. And I wrote it, and it was huge. It was almost as big as a novel. It was like, but by the time they cut it, it was a 10-part series. And nobody knew what to do with it. And it sat in the computer banks, I think, for 8 or 10 months. And what the hell is this thing that Ace Atkins is writing? What are we going to do with this thing? And then finally, lo and behold, Christmas comes around when everybody wants to take vacation.
Yeah.
What are we going to run during Christmas? Everybody's taking a damn
What could be
vacation.
better to run during Christmas
How about this 10-page, elephant that Atkins has written? Publish
about a
this
murder?
thing, and people really loved it. They really loved it, and I think that was where I was headed as a journalist. Unfortunately, I left the next year because of many factors. One of them just being that industry was just changing dramatically while I was there, and it wasn't as much fun as it used to be. But I think had I continued to be a reporter, those are the kind of stories that I like to write, which were kind of like early true crime, which is following a true story, following it, but telling it in an exciting way.
Are there any particular bad habits that you've had to overcome as a novelist that you picked up as a reporter?
I'm trying to think of bad. I think yes. Here's a bad habit: is being too succinct. I think that's a bad habit because when it's so nice to be able to talk here and talk conversationally or whatever. But with newspaper people tend to talk very quickly. I mean, it's very His Girl Friday-esque. It's yes, no, what's it? And when you tell a story, you go into your editor. I hear people talk about, oh, my novel is about this, and it's about this, and it's about changing culture, and it's what. That's not the way you tell a story. In the newsroom. The newsroom is, there's a guy and he's dead, but he's not dead. He faked his own death, and he's ended up in Canada, but he's had plastic surgery. That was a real story that was there when I was there.
Oh,
But
wow.
you got to be like that. And so a lot of times, as I'm still thinking in that very short format of
Hmm.
that, 18 inches, 12 inches, 10 inches, a brief. Is this a story that. So you always think in telling the story as quickly and getting to it. And
Yeah.
the genius, again, circling back to Elmore Leonard, is he really does the opposite of that. He kind of takes us on a journey. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's really halfway through La Brava before they're like, what's going on here? Until we understand what is happening. I mean, we're at at the clinic very early on, and we're meeting Joe La Brava, and he's taking pictures of this woman who's drunk, and what the hell is it? You just follow, but you trust him, and
Right.
and the story is so. He was such a keen observer of people and habits, and I think I think to really understand Dutch is, I think that, which I never called him Dutch, I only called him Mr. Leonard, but he is La Brava, and I think that's you. I went back and reread that book for the third time or whatever recently, and he is that observer. And so, what the fun of that is watching it. You trust him. Okay, I know we're going somewhere. I don't, but he doesn't. It's not the gun going off on page one. It's a much more leisurely pace.
Yeah.
It goes back to his obsession with being cool, and it is a very cool way of telling the story, which is trust me, let this unfold. And so I have to get over that. The bad habit for me is getting to it,
Hmm.
making that lead happen, telling the story very quickly. I'm trying to get better at taking my time a little bit and trusting myself.
Well, it seems like you're doing a great job. I mean, we could talk about "Don't Let the Devil Ride" a little bit. People should just go get it. It made me think of La Brava in a handful of ways. It's different time, different setting, but there's a hell of an ending, just like in La Brava. So like, there's some very very cool things. And what inspired that? Like, what was the kernel of that book? What was the idea that really got you to write that book?
Well, that's very high praise of any comparison to Elmore Leonard, because he's somebody I think about daily. When I sit down, and he would talk about. He was very honest when he wrote the foreword to Friends of Eddie Coyle, George Higgins' book, is how much that meant to him, and the fact that sometimes when he gets stuck creatively, he would go back to Friends of Eddie Coyle
Hmm.
just to kind of get a feeling and get back into the rhythm of those characters. And I do the same thing with Elmore Leonard. That's how I get back into it. But how did I get into? So again, kind of capsulating this in a very newspaper reporter kind of way. The novel is about a woman that her husband leaves on a business trip and doesn't return when he's supposed to. And when she looks into where he's possibly been, she finds out his business office is empty. Nobody knows where he's gone. His personal secretary is somebody that doesn't even know who her husband is. It just, everything's been like a facade. And
Hmm.
so she finds out after 15 years of marriage, who am I married to? What is my life? Is this who is this person that I've been involved with, and I have two kids with? And it was about a friend of mine, a woman that had been going through a really terrible divorce, and to hear her side of things, which I think had a lot of truth in it. She was married to a guy who was a master villain. I mean, he was one of the worst people on earth, and I think that maybe 75% of that was true.
Wow.
I mean, the character of the book, Dean McKellar, is a master criminal. He is a con man. He is a cutthroat. He is a truly evil international wheeler dealer. And so those two things about what it would be like to wake up one day and find out you were married to an international villain, and what would you do about it? That was the impetus for the whole book.
Did your wife like this book? Does it make her ask any questions
I
about
didn't. I
you,
didn't ask. I didn't
about
really
what
want to
you
know
really
her. I
do
didn't.
all
I
day,
didn't want to
Ace?
know. I didn't want to know her answer. She probably would have been very direct. Could you imagine what it's like to be married after 15 years, and you wake up and who is this person I'm married to? I didn't want to know the answer. I didn't ask her.
Fair enough. Well, It's awesome. I'm very glad I got to read it. So thanks for writing it.
Well, thanks very much. And kind of tagging on to that a little bit, the idea of celebrity and, what happens to your life after being famous. And, I don't think I was consciously thinking about La Brava, but I see a lot of that where I live outside Memphis. And so this week is what we call Death Week, which is something Elmore would have loved, which draws out characters from all over the world to come here. And
What's
a lot
Death
of
Week?
Death Week is a celebration of the week that Elvis died, and so it's a week of tribute art. I mean, this is straight out of Elmore Leonard. This is, tribute Elvis tribute artists and people that worked with him and former bandmates, and so I got to know a woman that was in that orbit that had made a movie with Elvis, and she was a very Gene Shaw type character. And one of the things, of course, watching the wheels turn with Elmore Leonard is, sit back and observe and take your time and watch people. And you never know when you can use that stuff. And it paid off.
Yeah, Joanna is a great character. And so you're in Mississippi now. You did spend a lot of time in Florida. And like one of the reasons specifically why I want to talk to you is because you were a crime reporter in Florida, in Tampa. And Elmore is, I think for people who don't know his books that well, you just think of him as writing books about Detroit.
Right.
And many of his great books are set there. But there's just as many great books set in Florida.
Absolutely.
And were you able to, have you read the biography by any chance?
I haven't. I'm looking forward to it. I'm right now. I'm interviewing Peter Gralnick on Monday, so I'm going through his new Elvis book.
Oh, nice.
But that's up next. I can't wait to read it.
It's great. Team Cushion's Chad, who was kind enough to come on the podcast, he sort of plants the Florida period, very deftly, where it started where Elmore bought a motel in Pompano Beach, Florida for his mom to run and manage and live.
Yeah.
She must have been in her early 60s, and so he and the family would start spending more and more time there, and then we got Gold Coast, and then we got Split Images, and then this whole run of Florida books. What is it about Florida that is different from Georgia or Mississippi or Alabama, or Virginia?
It's not the South. It's Florida. It's its own world. I think there was a time, and Elmore does a great job of that, especially when writing in the '80s, talking about that cross section of old Florida crackers, like the Crow family and those people living in the swamps and even like the old money. And he knows exactly that transitional period. And it was such a great time. I think it was an amazing time to be writing about Florida in the '80s. But I think that, you can imagine being a guy living in Detroit and being a lifelong Michigan guy, and then being able to fly down and be in Southern Florida. And it is just as a flip side of American life as anything. And I always think about that great transition in the film Out of Sight, where everything is colors and pastel and bright and neon and palm trees or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it's almost a different, I don't know if it's a different film stock when we go to Detroit, and it's the quick shots of the hard edge and the smoke coming out of the grates, and the statue of the fist, and that's it. I mean, that movie just captures exactly what I think are the two sides of Elmore Leonard. But I think that I think for somebody who's an observer, celebrates and appreciates weirdness and people that are different, Miami in the 1980s was a jackpot. I mean, I don't think he could have helped himself not write about it. You spend any time down there,
Right.
And especially, this is pre-Miami Vice, but you're getting, these are people, the drug trade is happening. There's so much crime happening, but it's strange and it's weird, and it's people from all different countries settling there, and it's great cultures. But he'll talk about the Cuban community recently coming in with the boat lifts, but at the same time, was writing about the old Jewish community that had been there, for ages, that are still hanging out there. And he just, I think that it's such a rich place I mean, especially Miami.
Yeah.
where it's everything. It's Haitians, it's Cubans, it's at that time people that had survived the Holocaust are now in Art Deco hotels that are in South Beach. It's the old cops and the drug trade, and then it's the wealthy people like the killer in Split Images and in that world. I mean, it's just a grocery store. And I think for me, I mean, I don't know for him the attraction, but somebody asked me one time about Florida crime fiction, which I really do give credit to Elmore Leonard as being really the godfather of what we think about people writing about Florida now, which is writing about it in a weird, offbeat kind of way. I mean, he really started it. But Florida, as a crime reporter, and in my experience, and I mean, he captures this. Elmore captures this beautifully. It's a place where people think they can start over, and It's a place where people think they can reinvent themselves.
Yeah.
Wherever they're from, and they think they can come there, and everything's going to be okay. But they get involved in some kind of scheme, and that's. I wrote about countless people like that had been from Ohio, and they come in and everything's going to be okay. They're going to start a business, and they're drawn there by the natural beauty and the beaches and the palm trees and all that. But they bring with them their criminal life that never goes away, and that's the oldest Florida story there is.
You sort of referenced Florida Man earlier and the weirdness, and its own thing. I want to dig into that a little bit more. I mean, someone who grew up there, what do you think it is that makes people take, maybe one chance too many? Or
Almost all the time that you see a story about Florida Man, if you read a little bit further down, they're from somewhere else. They're from the Midwest. It's a guy from Minnesota that
yeah,
got out of jail and then he relocates in Fort Lauderdale. So it attracts those people. And people that have been bad seeds in other places. It's a place to. You're seeing that with people from all kinds of walks of life. I mean, the worst of Florida usually are not native Floridians.
interesting. So it's not Florida; it's everybody else who's giving Florida.
It's a recruitment place to start your life over again. Everything's going to be okay in Florida, but when you come down to a place and you don't have a plan, you don't have a job, you don't have any money, and you're living in a tourist economy, that draws you into the life of
I
crime.
know there's a lot of tourism, obviously, in Florida, but I don't actually know what that means. When you say a tourist economy, what does that mean?
I meant just things are expensive.
Okay.
Life is expensive. The cost of living is expensive. You get down there and, Florida's great. Orlando's great. I'm going to, go to Disney World every year. What am I going to do for a job? So there's a lot of petty crime, and he, again, captures that just the daily beat, the daily grind of working in law enforcement, whether you're a homicide detective or I used to spend a lot of time with the U.S. Marshals, and they are just like that, just this the way it is with Karen Cisco. She's just spot on. I used to go with ride-alongs with them where they were picking up fugitives, and I remember one day we went and one of the guys was trying to catch the catch the assignment because it was a Hooters waitress who had had not come back for her court appearance. So they're all fighting over who to get this thing. It's just strange stuff every day.
When you're a crime reporter, do you feel like you're there to cover a story, you're there to find a good story, tell a good story, but to what extent do you feel like you're being maybe not used, but also like what the cops are telling you, what the marshals are telling you is to help them do their jobs, to help them.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
what's that dynamic like? I mean,
It's a different world now. I think when I was working the crime beat back in the '90s, you had recently passed Florida Sunshine Law, so you had these really the best open records laws in the country. You had a lot of cooperation with law enforcement. You had a lot of open doors policies. You had a great thing in Tampa at the time called Firehouse Cops, and where they would put a cop in the local firehouses so they could get into with their community. So there was not as much of this, dissension between. I never even thought about anyone thinking that being a reporter was a bad thing. It was all about getting stuff out there. Will cops use you? For sure. I mean, I was I remember covering this thing. I think they called it Operation Body Scrub, and it was with the Vice guys in Tampa that were busting these massage parlors that were all around. These 24-hour massage parlors. I was being, and I covered it, but I knew it was kind of a give and take. I know when they wanted me to cover this because they were trying to get the word out, like we're serious about cutting down on prostitution. Were they really making a dent in the prostitution in the area? No. Did it go back exactly where it was before? Sure. How much of that was authentic and how much of that was real? But then sometimes you would cover things like that for them, and then when something would happen, like a shooting that you needed information on, or a homicide that you could reach back out to your contacts. So it was a little bit of a trade there. I do remember being in. I mean, again, it's so fun reading this stuff in Florida. It's like I remember one of the operations, they had a guy and he had a baseball hat on, and he had he was an informant that was working for the police department. And he had a microphone in his hat, and the key word was hot, and it was hot. And he was this big, very big, kind of brawny Cuban guy, and he had this big hat on with a microphone in it. And so we're sitting in the van, and he goes into the place, and he's, and then all of a sudden we hear him going, "Oh, it's getting hot in here. Oh, hot. It's getting hot." And that's the key for all the cops to come rushing in. Hot, hot, hot. It's getting hot. And so, they come in, and so there was a lot of that humor, and Elmore Leonard captures that. So many times I read, crime fiction, the cops are so serious about their jobs, and they're very, and for a lot of those people that are doing that jobs, and he writes about people, they're great cops and there's bad cops. I mean, in Split Image was the cop that leaves the force to go work with the killer.
Yeah,
He's a
Walter.
terrible guy. He's a racist, and was working for that infamous stress unit up in Detroit, where cracking heads, and so he's very
Yeah,
honest
he killed
about
9 people.
9 people, and was proud of it. Proud of it. And was there one of the guys that he killed? He was disappointed the guy didn't die immediately; that it took time. So he was fair with that to really represent some. Yeah, I could tell that. I know that Elmore Leonard admired cops a great deal and he appreciated them, but he also recognized that they worked in an imperfect system, and I think that was very fair. He was not a guy that just celebrated law enforcement without understanding there was corruption, and that's what I saw. I mean, there were good cops and bad cops. Some of the best people I've ever met in my life, and then some people that were really dirty.
I bet. Did you ever investigate any police officers while you were a crime reporter?
I did, and one of the cases that I think that as an older person now, as an older reporter, I could have gotten to what really happened. And I don't think that as a young reporter, 24, 25 years old, I had the skill set to do the type of investigation that it really needed. I think I could have done it in my 30s or 40s, but I think getting into that initially, but it was a man who was mentally disabled who the cops beat the hell out of and put into a coma and killed him. And
Oh, wow.
I got to know his family, and I wrote stories about it. But I think that case continues to bother me because I think I could have done a better job with that somebody had more skills or a little bit older, could have found out exactly, could have gotten a little bit more close to what actually happened. Of course, we were stonewalled at every corner. And it's a closed IA investigation. Of course, it never ended up, I think, going anywhere. But the facts were pretty substantial, and that's a story that I investigated, but I wish I had done a better job on.
Is there anything stopping you now? I mean, it seems, I don't know if it's a book a year, but just incredibly prolific. Would you want to do more investigative, more crime reporting now? I mean, you don't have to,
I think
maybe.
it takes it. I miss it, and the opportunities to do that kind of work it has to really be interesting to me, and I think it's something that it has to be kind of a quirky story. It has to be something, the average podcast of opening up the old murder case and going through it and whatever. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work, and if you're going to do it right, it takes a lot of time, and there's less and less places where you can publish that kind of stuff. But the last time I did really an investigative story, I did a piece for Outside Magazine about a guy who was telling everybody that he worked for the CIA and he was getting these big government contracts, and he ended up swindling a couple up in Pennsylvania out of $12 million. And so I wrote, yeah, I'll send you that story later. So I can't, like I heard that, I heard a little piece of that,
Yeah.
and he had opened a training facility here in Mississippi. And when something like that comes on my radar, I just kind of stop everything and start working on it. But I haven't found a case. It's like I said, it's a tremendous amount of time and a big commitment, especially when you're under book contract.
Yeah. Well, if anyone listening is being swindled or doing some swindling of others at the moment, feel free to reach out, hello at the ElmoreLeonardPodcast.com, and we'll put you in touch with Ace.
Yeah, con men are fascinating to me. There was a guy, you could cut this out later, but there was a guy named Alfred Jack Oakley, who was one of my favorite stories I wrote about. He was a guy in his mid-70s, and he swindled women. He would meet women, and he'd pretend to be a multimillionaire who just was, somewhat temporarily couldn't get the funds that he needed, and so he was just temporarily not able to get the money that he, all the millions of money they had. He had business cards that talked about he had been a producer with Oliver Stone, and he had worked on Platoon, and he would go and present himself as a very wealthy guy, and he would go to the Rolls-Royce dealer, and the Rolls-Royce dealer would take him out to lunch, and they would drive around in the Rolls-Royce, and then he would go to a store. And he would, people present themselves as ultra wealthy. They don't ask a lot of questions. And so he ended up swindling these women out of money. And I ended up connecting with several of the women that he had jilted. And that was a good story. So I like that. There were a lot of con men, a lot of people in Florida that reinvent themselves, and a lot of people that become new people. And there's a lot of that in Florida that I find endlessly fascinating.
I think it's very true what you say, and I think in a lot of cases it's not that there's something nefarious about it. I mean, I think you have, especially if you have people coming up from Cuba or Haiti, and it's like, yeah, there might be some bad eggs in there, but there's also a lot of people like they're coming here to start a new life and
Sure,
to reinvent themselves in a positive way. Or you live up north your whole life and you're gonna go down to Florida and retire, and you become a new person.
Yes, Florida's a place for a lot of new beginnings, both good and bad. And unfortunately, as a crime beat reporter, I got to see a lot of the bad part of that. But yeah, con men, dirty cops, swindlers, preachers running pyramid schemes, just everything,
How did you get involved with writing continuing the Spenser books from Robert B. Parker?
So he was, Parker was one of my top writers, go-to writers, who I'd say were my formative, people that I studied, not people that I was just, I'm a fan of that writer, but somebody I really like with Elmore Leonard. I didn't just read, I don't read an Elmore Leonard book. I study it because he's the best, and you want to learn from the best. You learn from the best, and Parker was one of the best, another one of the best. And I would go back through his books and study them. I knew them, back and forth, inside out. And when he passed away, it became known. I was at the same publisher. I was at Putnam, and I had been there for some time. And someone had mentioned to me, they're looking for somebody to continue on writing Spenser. And my longtime editor, great Neil Nyron, Neil was a legendary editor. He edited Tom Clancy and Hyacinth and John Sanford, and the list goes on. He's just an amazing guy. He was a great editor. And he threw my name in the hat. And he said, I think Ace can do it. He said, I think, and I was primarily known as a Southern writer. Mm-hmm. So writing, urban Boston is a bit of a stretch. But he said, no, he could figure this out. And so I wrote 50 pages of what I thought would be the next Spenser book. It was funny. Bob's editor said, do you want me to send you a box of books so you can get used to his style? And I said, no. I said, I studied those books. I said, I have them all. I'll start tomorrow. And so I wrote within about 2 weeks what I thought would be the next Spenser novel. And I sent it. And his wife, Joan, his agent, and his editor all signed off very quickly. I
Well,
don't know if there are other people involved in the process. I'm not even sure how that went. Joan just couldn't figure out. She said, "I've been in Boston my whole life," and she said, "I don't know how I've met Ace Atkins." She goes, "I know all the Boston writers." So they had to break it to her that I lived in Mississippi, and she eventually wrapped her heads, and we became very good friends. So I did that for 10 years.
that is wild. And an idea of yours, or did like
There were
how?
no notes. There were no, there was an unfinished manuscript at one time, but I think it was like 2 pages. It came out of all brand new,
Yeah,
So I knew those characters very well, and I knew a true story that I had always wanted to use, but I had never used it for my own books. It was an idea of a case that I had actually helped out with, where I had done some work for the Innocence Project here, where there was a guy on death row that was visited by a woman that her mother had been he had been convicted of killing her mother, and the woman, who is now in her 20s, was an eyewitness that knew or believed this man did not kill her mother. She believed that this man was innocent, and so she was trying to find justice for this man on death row that was accused of killing her mother, because she believed that he was innocent, because she had seen two very different men shortly before her mother was killed. And so the idea of that, just the premise of that, had stayed with me. And so that became the first book I did for Parker, for Lullaby.
that's intense.
Yeah, yeah. I got to spend a lot of time in Boston. It was not a city I knew really at all. And for 10 years, I was back and forth flying between Memphis and Boston, and got to meet a lot of good friends up there. I got to know Bob's wife, who was wonderful, who has since passed away. His best friend was this guy named Mel Farman, and we used to go hang out and go to all the Spenser joints, and it was a great thing. They were probably my two top people that I never got to meet Bob in the way that I got to meet Elmore and got to spend time with them, which was just phenomenal. I wish I had, but we did exchange letters at some
You
point.
touched on it earlier, but just sort of speaking of Boston writers and Boston in general and the characters, Friends of Eddie Coyle is
Oh man,
it's by George V. Higgins. Elmore credits it as being a book that really unlocked things for him. It was
yeah.
given him by his agent at the time, and
No, and I mean it's a new perspective, and he would talk about Higgins all the time, and
yeah,
I guess he and Higgins had a great friendship, and he was always very appreciative of saying, "Hey, friends of Eddie Coyle," and it changed his life, from writing westerns into transitioning to writing about the city and modern real criminals. Not, I mean, that's the thing. I think the thing is about what Dutch did and what Higgins did. These are real criminals. These are not master criminals. These are not super terrorists coming in, or master killers, or even cops that are, have this great intellect to solve these crimes. These are just working class cops and robbers, and nobody did it better than Higgins and Leonard.
another great writer who spent some time in Boston. We got to talk to Dennis Lehane. He
Yeah.
also talks about Friends of Eddie Coyle, and that is something that we're gonna. If you're reading crime fiction now and you haven't read some of these earlier great books, that's one of. I mean, it's part of why we're doing the podcast, is not just telling people about Elmore's books, but some of the people who inspired him and who were his contemporaries. Revisiting some of the work now, Elmore's work now, it's still fresh, it's still modern. It is, doesn't matter what year it's set in, what year it was written. It's so true to human nature that it's always going to feel, so fresh. And I think it's also true about Charles Willeford or George V.
Oh yeah.
Higgins, some of these other great writers.
I think Higgins, one of the things that, Higgins straddling the ground of being both a journalist and also being a prosecutor is, as a prosecutor and also as a journalist, he's just reading depositions all the time, and he's reading wiretaps, and as a prosecutor, he's reading wiretaps. So you look at wiretaps, and I used to have to do that all the time, is when we would go for records or police records, is go back over, cases where we'd have to get a lawyer to shake loose, some of the files, and you read that stuff and you really learn how people actually talk. You watch when you're looking at a deposition or a court transcript or a interrogation, or interview or whatever. You see people talk very differently than they do on TV or in books, and I think that was Higgins' gift, his ear to put down on paper the reality of the way, and especially the way that criminals really talk, and really the way cops talk too. And it's very different than is presented in most media. I don't know anything that was probably as natural sounding, and I think it all was part of that movement. Go deeper of that movement of film, where it had a cinema verite feel of just coming in and like a film like Bullet or French Connection, where you didn't want to see something look like a Hollywood movie. You wanted to see something that looked like real life, and that's what Higgins did for literature, for books. Is he was presenting crime. Oh, you want to read a crime book? Well, I'll tell you about real criminals. This is not Agatha Christie. I'm going to tell you about real criminals, really people that are trying to eke out a living and make money and save their skin. And I think it was, as Elmore Leonard wrote a terrific forward at one point for Friends of Eddie Coyle that changed his life. But then he had to go beyond that. It wasn't just that he took the style and he, tried to expand upon it. He had to do the research. He had to talk to people. He had to listen to people. He had to, like, again, it was not what he knew. It was what he learned. And he was such a curious guy. And it was so funny for him. You think, I could talk endlessly about Elmore Leonard, but one of the most marvelous things about him, when he is well into his 70s, he was or 80, still considered who is the hippest, cool writer there is. It's Elmore Leonard, which is amazing. Because he's always learning, he's always processing, he's learning about music and culture and what's happening in the world and keeping things fresh. But yeah, I think that there's not enough to be really said about it. If you are a student of crime fiction, Friends of Eddie Coyle and Higgins in general was a real game changer.
Yeah, for sure. Two last questions. The first one is a quick one, and it's Auburn related.
Okay.
Did you ever meet Bo Jackson?
Many times. He was there. Yeah, he was there before. I mean, his era was a few teams before
10
mine.
years before you.
Yeah, but he would come back. He was one of those guys like Charles Barkley, who would come back to Auburn all the time and talk to the players and hang out. And yeah, he was there all the time. Yeah, he was there often. This would have been, and especially after he was injured and his pro career was over. Was back in Alabama with business, and yes, yeah. Probably saw Charles Barkley more. Charles Barkley was at our, even though being a basketball player, he was at our practices all the time, giving us talks. He was terrific. Yeah, so funny.
Oh, that's great. That is great. I'm pretty fascinated by Bo Jackson, just his story, and but he seems like he's
phenomenal. He was just one of those guys who just possessed limitless talent.
Yeah,
phenomenal. It's just hard to even put in words the kind of talent that guy had.
All right, this is not really on topic.
Okay.
But I think you're the perfect person to ask this question to. So for a long time in literature and in entertainment television, there was the private eye. There was the person who's going to solve it, but it's not a legal issue, it's a moral issue that they're trying to address and make right. And then we kind of went from private eyes to reporters. And, obviously, most famous would be based on a true story, but All the President's Men and Woodward and Bernstein, and, the reporter is the, the person. Who is that person today? What is that job today that kind of doubles as like this, it's our moral conscience in action? I really think about this a lot when I'm reading different books, and
I think it's not an original idea. I did a panel some time ago with a terrific writer named Matt Goldman, and Matt was talking about he thought there was going to be a return to the classic private eye format because people these days have such a low trust in government. I tend to these days I've gone back to writing about private eyes, but also about just ordinary people that are caught up in the machines of a very corrupt world. I mean, we've never lived in a time, certainly not in my lifetime, that has been as wildly corrupt and as unstable. I mean, I think that maybe the Nixon years probably seem like Camelot compared to today.
Maybe.
But who is that person? I don't think, as I've said, I've worked with some of the best people in the world covering them as police officers and people who work for the Marshal Service or some terrific people. But I don't think that the public has the kind of trust that they used to. I think we went through a period post 9/11 where there was a celebration of anybody that had been wear to wear a uniform.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as the years have progressed, we're a little bit more weary as a culture of there are some true heroes among us, but there are also some people who use that for their own gain. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm writing about a person right now that has been fictionalized, but is based on somebody who's a political figure who's fabricated a lot of their background, a lot of their military service, and that kind of thing. So I think the institutions are not as trustworthy at this time at all. So we're looking for people to be, but I don't know. I mean, the old newspaper reporter, the Woodward and Bernstein, and the people getting out. I love that time, but I
Yeah.
feel like it doesn't exist anymore. I hate that. I think that there was always a point that if you couldn't go to the cops, you didn't trust the government. You could put the truth out there, and then people would react and resign and head off on a helicopter. But that doesn't happen anymore. So I don't know. I don't have. I wish I knew. I wish I knew who those people were. I think that's maybe just average citizens.
Right.
But finding stand-up people to get to things just for honor or for truth is getting to be more fictional these days than we used to find in reality. I think the crooks. I think those are the only people we can. Like, we'll go back to Elmore Leonard. The only people we can really trust to be honest about things. There was a guy. I'll tell you this. I'm sorry. We keep on digressing on stuff.
No.
I'm like Elmore Leonard in the fact that I love meeting criminals. And there was a guy here who was a federal prosecutor, John Howlman, who's a good friend of mine, and he was again just a character. He was not only a federal prosecutor, he was also the former wine critic for the Washington Post. So get that. And so he said, "I want you to come to my book signing." He had written his memoirs, and he said, "I know you like to write about the Dixie Mafia," which Elmore did in Tishomingo Blues.
Tishomingo, yeah.
He said, "I think there's going to be a few guys show up." And sure enough, we were down in a book signing at a library down in Calhoun County, which is very similar to the world that I write about in my books. And the guy showed up. He went by the name of Poppy, and he was a fence. And so he had dealt, for years in stolen stuff in North Mississippi and come out. And first thing he said, he was wearing all kinds of, like a lot of pawn shop guys, a lot of jewelry, a lot of gold, whatever. And he said, "John, I want to tell you," he said, "you got me 2 or 3 times, but," he said, "I have to say, you did it fair and square." He said, "You got me." He said, "You were honest about it." He said, "You never tried to cheat me." And he said, "You got me fair and square." And so he made a big thing of John's book was like $40. It was this huge thing. And
Yeah.
Poppy said, "I'll take," he said, "how many books do you want?" He said, "Well," he said, "I'll take 3 or 4 of them." And he took out a roll of cash that was, about 5 inches thick and peeled off the money. So John knew that he was still, still
Active.
still had a decent cash flow. I don't know what he was doing, but it was just characters like that you come across from listening and to talking to people. Dutch, he was always listening, and he was always processing things, and he was always watching. And again, I go back. I think if you really want to get a sense of who Elmore Leonard was as a person, I think he's Joe LaBrava. I think he's the guy. He's the photographer, and he's wandering around South Beach, and he's noticing guys like a guy with a wheelchair wheeling around, and then the guy doesn't even need a wheelchair. He'd stolen it from Eastern Airlines, but he said it's a real cool way to go around. And there's one point where LaBrava's like, "I'll try it out." Why don't he's in charge of the wheelchair? So, and that, he got that from something. He saw somebody. He saw somebody in South Beach. And
Yeah.
that's what I think. That's the goal of the writer, is to listen and to observe. And he was a master.
He absolutely was. Ace, thank you for taking the time today and sharing some of your stories about hanging with Elmore. Oh, damn it. I've got one last question.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
What is it like giving your book to, whether it's Elmore Leonard or another great author that you admire, and waiting for them to read it? Like, that sounds like absolute hell to me.
I think you wait just you really are hoping it's. I think it's tough when you're sitting with somebody you really really admire,
Yeah.
and so I asked for a good word from both Robert Parker and from Elmore Leonard, and I think it was just an excitement to know maybe they'd glance at it.
Yeah.
Maybe they just, at least they looked at the title. Maybe they'd read a couple pages. And in Elmore Leonard's case, it ended up paying off. And it wasn't just, whatever he said about the book, about, that he enjoyed the book. But was later, what I really appreciated of him is he told me what he thought, how I could improve and how I could get better. And so, but it wasn't a nerve-wracking experience. It was more of an excitement, the fact that I even had an open line of conversation with these people, and it was just to be an Elmore, you didn't ask Elmore dumb questions. He didn't like small talk. He was a really one word. He probably would be terrible on a podcast. He would have been terrible because he would answer you with a lot of yes, no, yep. He was that guy. He's Raylan. He's Carl Webster. He answers very succinctly. But yeah, just to be able to have a line of communication with those guys was phenomenal, because they're no longer with us, and they were masters. And you talk about I got to watch 310 to Yuma, the original, with Elmore in France.
Holy
And
cow.
and of course it's just a little town. It's called Frontignan. It's a little French village, and for some reason it's where they do a crime festival every year. And after this crazy dinner, big dinner they had, we're sitting out, and they had a projector. I mean, I haven't seen a projector. I guess this was like 2011. I can't remember the date. 2011, 2012, and they had the projector out with the reels spinning, and watching the original 310 to Yuma, and watching that, and you think, what a career that spanned, from Glenn Ford,
55,
and,
57.
and it goes all the way to J Lo. I mean, it's really, it's very impressive, and what a world that he had experienced. But it's an amazing legacy, and I'm glad people are continuing to talk about him, and I think they will for the end of time, because he captured life without any filters over it and any lenses. He reported it, the unvarnished truth, and I think that's why we like it so much.
The Elmore Leonard podcast is produced and edited by Judd Rubin. Music by Greg Ahee. Hosted by Judd Rubin and Alex Leonard. Executive produced by Peter Leonard. Copyright 2025, Elmore Leonard Inc. Please visit us at elmoreleonardofficial.com or send us an email at hello@theelmoreleonardpodcast.com.